Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. I have one more tree or trees to clean up for our fall bonsai shows, and that's my cedar avatar grove. Here is a look at the avatar grove. So it's filled in a little bit since the last time I pruned it. Today's work will mainly be cleaning up the landscape. This forest is inspired by the real-life avatar grove near Port Renfrew in British Columbia, Canada. My avatar grove is planted on a hillside, and I'm styling the trees to look like old growth cedars, those cathedral style trees. And slowly they are getting there. This spring I will be reworking the forest. I'm going to add a few straight trees out front. Some of the trees in the back are a little crooked. I'll straighten those out. So there'll be a little reworking of the forest to improve that old growth look. My first dilemma with this forest is, do I clean up the trunks of the trees? Right now they have some lichen on them, a bit of algae. They kind of look like an old growth tree. If I clean them up, I think they'll look more like, the bright California redwoods. So I've got to decide what look I want to go for in the forest, if I want to keep them as is, or do I want to clean them up and brighten up the trunks. You can see on the main tree here that some of the strips of bark have flaked off. So there's some areas that have a lot of lichen and some areas where the bark just naturally stripped off. It's a little cleaner looking. I think I'm leaning towards leaving the trees as they are, leaving the lichen on them, making them look like, really old ancient trees. I think my focus today will be cleaning up the landscape. There's a lot of weeds that need pulling, and I'll have to trim up the moss and possibly add some new moss. All right, I'm going to begin with the weeding, pulling out all the little weeds. Trying to get them by the roots so they don't come back. So some of these areas where I'm picking out the liverwort, I may have to replace it with fresh moss because, there's a lot of areas where the liverwort is quite thick and I just have to, pull the moss and the liverwort out together. So I'm already in what I call the bonsai zone. When I'm working on this landscape, it looks like a giant forest to me. I'm in the zone, I guess. So I treat each little area of the forest in detail. You imagine yourself standing there, and anything out of place you remove to try and make it look super miniature. The root base on the main tree here is developing really nicely. It's looking good and miniature. So I'm very happy with that. This is very relaxing working on this. It's a beautiful sunny morning. The birds are chirping outside. I've got the whole day to work on this forest. So it's a very nice way to spend a day. So usually I clean away all the moss from the root base, but in this case I'm going to leave it to look like an old growth forest that's never been touched by man. There's even some new roots forming on the root base. There's a new root coming down here. There's one here. And they look really, really good. They add some fine detailing to the root base. There's a weed here I can pull out. Got the roots. I talked about working on small sections of the forest at a time. So here's a place where I had to take out a lot of liverwort, and you can see it's just bare soil with some roots. So I'll replace that moss right away while I'm working in that area. So I'll just push in some new moss, some sidewalk moss. And yeah, as I said, it's best to work in small areas at a time and just fix them up rather than being overwhelmed by the entire forest. You just make each section look nice, and then when you step back and look at the overall forest, the whole composition's looking really good. So there's that area replaced with fresh moss. I've dug out the liverwort from the front of the pot here, and you can see it needs moss replacement to fill in that space. So I'll get some moss and moss up the front here. All right, here I go. Start in the corner. Well, I'll start here. This should provide a nice variety of mosses too. There'll be, this fresh green moss. There'll be some of the older moss. Should be a good mix in the landscape. Okay, so that's looking good. I'll need to get some more moss from the sidewalk out front now. I am out of moss. I've collected some more moss from the front sidewalk. So that should be enough to do the forest, I hope. So that is another area completed on the landscape. This front area here. It's looking very nice. Just making sure my moss is pushed down firmly. And I'll give that a water too, just to water it in. All right, here I go with the water. I'm working on this corner of the landscape now. I notice there's a rock overhanging the pot here. Some moss overhanging the lip of the pot, so I'll have to clean this area up. So I'll start by pruning away the moss. Oh, this rock. This moss is a little thick here, so I'll prune it back. You want your moss to be in scale. You don't want it to look like giant weeds. Now, about this rock overhanging the lip of the pot, I'll have to try and push it in. There. That's better. I always like to see a clean lip on the pot, nothing overhanging it. It's like the frame of a picture. You don't want your picture out of the frame. Okay, so I think a little tweezer work is still in order in this area. I don't want the moss obscuring the rock completely. And I don't want too much moss at the base of the trees either. Otherwise it looks a little too tropical. Any moss that's kind of brown, it's best to pull it out and just replace it. So underneath here I'll replace it. You can see some fresh roots in here from the cedars. Here's a look at that area. It's looking very, very nice. I cleaned up the lower part down here, but I think the top is a little overgrown with moss. So I'm going to peel some away from the base of the tree because it's very thick in this area. And it's a bit out of control. I think underneath the trees should be a little finer moss. Not so lush looking like it's overgrown with weeds and bushes. So I'll peel away sections of the old fluffy moss and I'll replace it with some younger, newer moss to provide a bit of variety in that area. So attention to detail in a forest can really make or break the forest. If it doesn't, if you haven't put the time in, it's not going to look as miniature as it could. Realistic. Okay, so I've got that area cleared out there. So I'm going to put some fresh moss in there now.
It should provide some nice contrast with that older moss. Okay, I think it's looking better. There's just a few patches I need to fix up here. Alright, I like that. And then I'll just trim this wild moss back a bit, neatening it up. You can see some of this moss up here is a little brown, so I'll just snip away the tips of it.
Alright, I think this area is looking quite scenic. I'm looking at the landscape from the distance now. So there's some very interesting sections. Down here looks awesome. Over here looks good. The tree looks good. But behind the tree here is kind of a plain mossy section. That moss needs to be broken up. Maybe the suggestion of a pathway through here, just so it doesn't look like a big blob of moss up there. I've got to break it up, make it look more detailed and miniature. Alright, so I'm going to break this blob up. I'm going to separate it here. There's sort of a natural separation line here. You want every part of your landscape to be interesting. That way people can explore it, and it really draws them into the landscape. If it all looks the same, if it's just all mossed up, well, there's nothing to explore. It's just plain and kind of boring. So if you can break things up, add rocks, pathways, moss, bushes, anything like that, adds detail and interest to your forest. So you can see even with this separation, it's already looking better. And I highly suggest, if you can, take a walk in the forests, have a look, study the details of a forest, and it'll inspire you. You'll train your brain what to do with your bonsai forests, and it'll inspire you to create interesting landscapes. So that looks better already. Now, I'm wondering, do I need like a rock in here maybe? That might look good, a little rock. I've got kind of a flat rock. I'm just trying it out. Yeah, that could look okay. I think that rock's too big. I need something small. I think that's about the right size. It's not a very good shaped rock. I've got to find something a little more interesting that's not so rounded. Maybe this one? Maybe not. Maybe I don't need a rock there. Maybe I just need like a moss plateau. Might look better. I have enough rocks in this planting. I don't really want to make it any heavier than it is already. And rocks quickly add weight to a planting, and it gets really, really hard to lift. This is probably one of my more heavy plantings. This and that European buckthorn. I'll try putting moss up here, see what it looks like. Kind of creating a plateau there. How does that look? I think that does it. I'll show you from a different angle. So there it is. I think that creates an interesting feature in the landscape. It breaks that moss ball up. I'll have to do some work on top here also. I've been working away at the top of the hill here, exposing a few more rocks that are up here. I want to keep some of the moss around the rocks, but not all of it. So that's looking better. You can see the moss bush in here I created. You can see the trunk of this tree now. It definitely looks more interesting. It used to be just a big blob there. Now it's become a miniature landscape. Okay, I need to add some fine moss up at the top of the hill now. All right. Well, I thought I had enough moss to do this forest, but I think I've underestimated the amount I need because I'm using it up very quickly. But I'm happy with the results. I'm getting quite excited about the forest. Well, that's looking like a cool little landscape. I'll show you it from a different angle. So here's that area. So it used to be just like a moss ball on top of the hill, and now it's
you know, an interesting little place.
I've rotated around to the back of the planting, so there's all kinds of weeds growing out the back here that I've got to remove. That one. There's a lot of mushrooms growing out the back down low here too. Some of this moss isn't looking so good here. I'll have to replace it. The back of the planting isn't so important, but it's nice to get it cleaned up. I took a lunch break. I thought it was around noon hour, but it was actually 2:30 in the afternoon. So time flies when you're having fun. So the landscape is progressing really nicely. I do have to break up this side. It's like a big blob of moss. This side has come really nice. It's looking really good and detailed. I'll have to get some more moss. I'm running short again. But yeah, it's coming along. I mean, it could be showable the way it is right now, but I'll improve that one side, and I think that'll be it for today. All right, I'm going to begin the work. I'll pull out some moss. Separating it into clumps. Try to get a stepped effect rather than a rounded hill. On the right hand side, I've got some more weeds and liverwort. Well, weeds including liverwort. So we'll get all that out. All right, I think I've got all the liverwort and weeds out of this end section. So now I can replace it with the new moss. All right, I'll give this a water and then I'll pick out any more remaining needles. And I think I'll be done. I don't think the trees need any pruning or pinching. I think they're all good. I have completed the work on the Avatar Grove. I put it on top of the stand that Matt made for me. So let's fly in now and have a look at the forest. Here is a final look at the forest from the distance. I think it looks quite nice. I've got a busy night ahead. I've got to make sure all my trees are watered. I have to load up the car with all the trees and stands and accent plants. Then I'm heading out tonight to help set up the show, the tables and everything. And then I can go to bed. And I have to be at the show tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to start the setup. So that is all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.